Hello, we are honored to have a kickoff guest, Bill McKibben from Ripton, Vermont, or I don't know, Middlebury College, somewhere in between the two. Um, Bill is the well-known as the founder of 350.org and a global grassroots climate campaign, which I think fits the description pretty well. Had a leading role against the Keystone XL pipeline. Also the founder of Third Act for over 60 action on climate. Hopefully they'll give AARP a run for the money. Author, educator, and environmentalist. In 1989 wrote The End of Nature, the first book about basically about climate change, and has been the author of over 20 books, most recently The Flag, the Cross, and the Station Wagon. And perhaps you might explain a little bit about that. Bill is also the Schumann Scholar, Distinguished Scholar at Middlebury College, and been involved as a journalist and staff writer for the New Yorker, Rolling Stone, Mother Jones, and a number of other organizations. Local interest, born in Palo Alto, lives in the same town as Robert Frost, knows where the yellow wood, where the two paths go. And I will turn it over to talk. The touchstone is an article that we'll put up in the chat, the Mother Jones article about yes in our backyards. Greetings.
Well, greetings. What a pleasure to get to be with you. And we'll just talk for a few minutes here. You can ask me questions, but I'll lay out the some of the things that I've been thinking. My work, as you know, is mostly about climate change. I wrote the first book about what we now call climate change, what we then called the greenhouse effect, back in 1989. And so I was in my 20s then, which means I've spent my pretty much entire adult life working on what's become the biggest dilemma that our species has ever faced. I've also been very interested in housing my whole life. When I lived in New York and was writing for the New Yorker as a young man, I started a homeless shelter. I met my wife because she was working on homeless issues. I lived for a while on the streets of New York as a homeless person in order to write about it. Um, so these two crises, one of them endless, vexing, and inhumane, the other existential and very, very time limited, have always been near to heart for me. And one of the things we can say at this point confidently is that in order to deal with them, we're going to have to build a lot of things. We're going to have to build as we haven't in a long time. In the case of housing, that's, I guess, more or less obvious. We need more of it, and we need it to be dense and infilled, and we need to create much more livable communities than we have now. We need to do it for moral reasons and practical reasons, but we also need to do it because it'll be a better city or town once it's done. Among other things, now that I work with older people like me, we spend a lot more time thinking about the concept of things like aging in place, which won't be possible in the vast, spread out suburban landscapes that we've built since the Second World War, but is much more possible to imagine in somewhat denser, more diverse, demographically, economically, age-wise communities. The case is at least as obvious, I guess, with energy. Conquering the climate crisis, or in this point in time, just ameliorating it as best we can, means rapid phase down of dirty energy. What drives climate crisis is coal, gas, and oil, and biomass. Anything you set on fire produces carbon, leaks methane, heats the atmosphere. It's obviously become an emergency. 2023 is the hottest year on this planet in at least 125,000 years, and we see the results all over the place. Because people are going to continue using a lot of energy, even as we are trying to get people to conserve and use less, we need to be able to replace that coal and gas and oil with something else. And happily, the engineers have given us that something else. They've dropped the price of energy from the sun and the wind and the batteries to store that power when the sun goes down or the wind drops. They've dropped the price of that technology 90% over the last decade. We now live on a planet where the cheapest way to produce power is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. There's no technical or financial obstacle now to making rapid progress on climate change. But that doesn't mean that there aren't obstacles, just as there are obstacles to building enough housing. Some of those obstacles are obvious and enormous. The power of the fossil fuel industry, working full on to defend its business model, has kept Congress from doing anything about climate change until it finally, by the narrowest of margins, passed the Inflation Reduction Act last year. And even that was badly compromised by the power of that oil lobby. And some of them are less obvious and often connected. The ability of people to decide that they do not want a solar panel or a wind turbine near them, often at the behest of the fossil fuel industry, is enough to slow down this absolutely necessary transition. And in fact, slowing it down is the same as never doing it, because as scientists have pointed out, we have 5 or 6 years to cut our emissions in half, else we're going past ratchet steps from which there's no way back. Once you've melted the Arctic, nobody has a good plan for freezing it back up again. And so we need to build and build quickly. There are no free lunch, of course. Building solar panels and wind turbines ends up meaning that you need critical minerals and you need to take some land, though nowhere near as much as most people think, and so on. These are not perfect. There is no perfect solution here, but they're a hell of a lot better than the status quo. Using fossil fuel requires far more mining than anything else ever would, because you, unlike lithium, you take coal and set it on fire, and then you have to go mine some more tomorrow. And it requires, fossil fuel requires huge amounts of land, even as it destroys much of the world around us with rising sea levels, spreading deserts, and so on. That means that we have to get better at settling for the thing that's not absolutely the thing that, were the world a perfect place, we might want. And we need to do that on all sorts of fronts. When I say we, in this case, when I wrote that article for Mother Jones, and when I talk, I'm really referring to people like me, old white people who are good at stopping stuff. It's one of our superpowers. We've acquired enough resources and enough knowledge of the law and so on that if we want to slow something down, we often can. And I'm suggesting we shouldn't be trying to do that when it comes to housing and to energy, that the benefit of the doubt should go to doing the building and construction that's necessary to get us where we need to go. I'm not sure that's as true for, say, indigenous people or frontline communities. I can understand why Native Americans, say, might decide they want to sit out the next industrial revolution because the last one wasn't too kind to them. But I do think that for people who hold the most power in this country, it's actually time not to use some of that power and let the things that need to happen. And I think in particular, often it's been older people like me that have been the most reluctant to see change. Sometimes I think our motto, sometimes I think in my home state of Vermont, which I love very much, our motto probably should be, change anything you want once I die, it's very hard to make the changes that we need to make, but we need to make them. And those changes, above all, are attitudinal. They involve seeing things differently. They involve looking at a wind turbine and seeing um, the breeze made visible. They involve looking at an infill, denser, multifamily housing development and seeing the beginnings of a new neighborhood, a new community, live and vibrant with people. Um, those things are beautiful. And learning to look for that beauty is, I think, a key task.
Hi, I'll just pop back on. I wonder, you had kind of in your article an organizing principle, as you know, I guess mentioning a search for rules and general principles that people can use on a kind of a given basis, in turning NIMBY passion into YIMBY enthusiasm, or at the very
Yes,
least acquiescence.
there's a bunch of them, but one of them really is to think about what constitutes your backyard. Um, we all do have a particular place where we live, and we should love and cherish it. But we also live on a planet, and that's our backyard too. And you can't defend your local area at the cost of wrecking the planet, nor should we try to do it at the cost of further damaging the people who've already paid the price for our conveniences. If you don't want a solar panel near you because you think it's unsightly, imagine what it's like to live near a mountain that's getting ripped open because there's a coal seam underneath it. Um, if you don't want to look at a wind turbine 20 miles off your beach that's the size of your thumb when you hold it up against the skyline, you know, think about the creatures that have to inhabit an ocean that's now warming really fast and turning more acidic because of the carbon that we've poured into the atmosphere, on and on and on. So that strikes me as one action, the one sort of thing to bear in mind. Another is that, you know, we've acquired real debts over time in terms of the climate system. One of those is this overhanging carbon debt. All the carbon that we've put up in the atmosphere is, most of it's still up there. I mean, the CO2 that came out the tailpipe of my family's maroon Plymouth Fury when I was getting my learner's permit in 1974 is still up there in the atmosphere trapping heat. So even if I buy a Tesla today, I'm still in, uh, 50, 45 years of carbon debt to planet Earth. So we should be willing to assume some of that by allowing things to be built. Similarly, the suburb where I grew up um, effectively excluded poor people and people of color by having a ban on multifamily housing for 50 years. Um, that's one reason that the racial wealth gap in this country has just kept growing. Because if you couldn't get in at the bottom of the real estate elevator in the 1960s or 1970s that has glided so many to relative prosperity, then you were out of luck. And, that is a debt that's owed too, and one that happily we can make up through things like rezoning our communities to make it possible for people to live efficient lives in multifamily houses, which are a good thing.
Yeah, I think you had a good. It's almost a good bumper sticker here. And idealism involves realism, and referring to that, as well as some of the what I think are calling like some cynical fights. Like if a given project isn't 100% affordable, for
Right.
instance.
Right. Well, you find a lot of people who all of a sudden are extremely worried about what lithium mining might do to somebody somewhere, but don't seem to have cared at all what coal mining or gas drilling have been doing to millions of people for centuries. Um, um, and the answer is that all the stuff we have to mine and drill now will be doing a lot less damage. One way to think about the energy transition is that 40% of all the ship traffic on planet Earth is just carrying coal and gas and oil back and forth to get burned. Um, that gives you some sense of how much we could dematerialize the economy. It also gives you some sense of why the Exxons of the world fight it so hard. They like selling you a new cargo of oil every few weeks. For them, the idea that the sun would deliver your energy for free every morning when it rises above the horizon is a completely stupid business model. So they'll do their best to make sure that it never takes hold, and their best, given their money, is often pretty darn good.
Yes, you mentioned, I guess, a professor in Providence, Rhode Island, Thea Riofrancos,
Mm.
who's looked at a lot of mining issues and things. I did want to give a plug for the potential for instead of strictly lithium mining, which does, it's closer to strip than not. There is a potential in terms of geothermal
We can
recovery.
start distilling some of that brine coming out of the Salton Sea in places, and um, get some. There may be some interesting synergies there. You're absolutely right. Uh, when we use renewable energy, to some degree, we're using people's ingenuity. Uh, and these are all technologies that are on a learning curve. They get efficient more quickly, unlike fossil fuel, which is on a depletion curve, gets harder and harder and more expensive to find over time. So going down this path resolutely is the right way forward, I think. And I think really there's a generational understanding of this. I think the easiest people to convince that say we need to build stuff are younger people, because they understand they're staring down the barrel of a housing shortage and a climate crisis. And they understand that both are ameliorated to one degree or another by building as we haven't built in a long time. Not never. There have been moments when we've built at this pace. The last time we faced an existential crisis, it was fascism in Europe in the middle of the 20th century. And man, did the US learn how to build in a hurry. We suddenly were churning out the planes and tanks and bombers that prevented the fascist takeover of the planet. And thank heaven for it. We can do that again, but this time we don't need to kill anybody, just the opposite. We'll be saving millions of lives a year as we clean the air that people have to breathe. And the same with housing. We know how to do this, and we know how to do it happily in efficient and environmentally sound ways now. A well-built new apartment unit or townhouse or anything is it's possible to make its energy use next to nil, and that's another place where these two issues cross. So that's really important. Um, and and it's why I'm so grateful to get to be here with you today. I have to get off now. I have to go give a talk elsewhere, because there's organizing around all this goes on and on and on. But what a pleasure to get to be with you, and thank you for your efforts. Um, we'll see. We'll see if we have what it takes still to be builders in that sense going forward. A working world, I think, really demands it. So thank you.
Actually, you're talking about the industrial production in World War II era, got me thinking about the post World War II housing boom.
No, absolutely right. A very similar thing. When we
Yeah.
want to do it, we can do it. So let's figure out that we want to
Yeah,
do it.
that was maybe not done the best way. I mean, it was
No,
a very much a
but it
car
was
culture
it
thing.
was
And
impressive.
yeah, in scale, it
Yes.
was great. So yeah, hopefully, great. Well, thanks for helping us kick
Thank you
off
so
Build a
much, and
Palooza.
thank you for your good work. Take care, man.
All righty.